Between stimulus and response there is a space. And in that space lies our growth and our freedom. One of the unfortunate truths of modern life lies in the minds of you and I, the people. Despite all of the improvements in our quality of life, our access to information, and our ability to connect with one another, our general mental health seems to have gone the other way. And while many of the struggles of our past have been solved, newer, more complex difficulties seem to be anchoring us to suffering. Data from 2020 estimates that 14.8 million US adults aged 18 and over have had at least one depressive episode. Other data from the World Health Organization shows that 1 in 13 people globally suffers from anxiety. That's roughly 8% of the global population. It's difficult to muddle through the causation and correlation of this, but this worsening of our mental health is coming at a time where we're seeing a general widespread lack of trust in our institutions. Everything is seemingly more expensive than it used to be. Reported loneliness is higher than ever, and many people, particularly young people, struggle with a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives. This is all very likely compounded by the fact that social media and negatively slanted news consumes much of our downtime, and we scroll through content that is for the most part not adding much value to our lives. And while there is definitely some good being done out there, the juicy stuff and the content that catches our attention is often negative and divisive. But the content itself isn't the problem we're going to tackle today. We're going to be specifically looking for a solution to counterbalance the negative ways the world can make us feel. And we're going to be using some specific ideas from philosophy to help us do this. In the 18th century, a person named Jean-Jacques Rousseau said man was born free, yet everywhere he is in chains. While some of these chains are placed on us by our environment, many are avoidable and even self-imposed, and we're going to look at exactly how we can break them. We're going to find a way to first see them, then break them, and then find a way to avoid them altogether and find a calm path through a world that's filled with noise. So to clarify this, our problem, as we've seen, is twofold. We're seeing a worsening of our general mental health and an increase in distractions. In other words, we're exposed to a great deal of hardship which we're unable to deal with in a resilient way. We know this because resilience prevents external difficulties from worsening our well-being. And our attention is going anywhere but towards helping us deal with this hardship, preventing us from building resilience and lessening hardship's impact on our overall well-being. Our inability to resist our phones and other distractions is robbing us of the ability to deal with negative experiences and negative emotion. The constant non-stop nature of life today has many people stuck bouncing in a state of stimulus and response. So what do I mean by stimulus and response? This is essentially a state in which we unconsciously float through the day. We have things happen to us, and then we respond to them. We respond to them reactively, with no space in between to think or reflect on what we feel, why we might feel that way, what contributes to these feelings, what we believe to be true about the world, and things like whether or not our beliefs and responses are realistic, rational, and constructive. And this list can go on. Over time, this reactive lifestyle can create feelings of stress, helplessness, ineffectiveness, bitterness, and burnout. But it can also disconnect us from who we are, our beliefs and our values, because who we are gets drowned out by the noise and the busyness of life. I'm sure you can get a sense for what I mean when I speak about losing our sense of self, as our work, relationships, kids, and general responsibilities take precedence over time alone, reflection, and a bit of self-care. If we get stuck in this reactive way of life, in a way we become puppets of our environment. We're constantly being pushed and pulled by externals without really pausing to sit and think about what it is we're doing, what we really want, what we're feeling, or why we're feeling that way. You can think about your own daily routine, from traffic to work to loved ones to endless notifications, and that weird thing our hand does by automatically reaching for our phone even though we haven't made a conscious decision to do that, or even instinctively reacting to feelings of hunger, fear, anxiety, and stress. Unfortunately, this is the default state of a lot of people a lot of the time. To combat this and make sure that we don't become puppets of our environment, we're going to look at two key ideas. The first is a method that we can use to break out of this living reactively. The second is a method that we can use during the day so that we can more reliably implement this first method. With these two things, we really can shift ourselves away from being a plaything of chance and circumstance to being more deliberate, decisive, resilient, self-aware, and purposeful. In other words, we break the chains holding us to suffering. The 17th century philosopher Benedict Spinoza wrote about this while in isolation. He was excommunicated from his Jewish faith because of his unpopular views on the idea that God and nature are essentially one and the same thing, something that really was not accepted at the time. Spinoza saw that many people fall into the habit of simply responding to life. They experience things around them. Those experiences produce thoughts, beliefs, and emotion, and then people react to these things more or less mindlessly. As a result, many people live lives which are totally dictated by the ongoings of the world around them. They become the playthings of circumstance, whose behaviors and emotions are not the person's choice, but simply the result of what happens to them. Spinoza believed that for a person to break free from this way of life, they have to first understand what influences their emotions, be aware of these influences in their day-to-day life, and make a deliberate effort to choose our response rather than have them chosen for us by our environment. This means that we have to learn to reflect on how we respond to our circumstances, learn to create a gap between what we experience and how we react, and use this gap to stop, reflect, and decide our response, rather than have our behavior defined by the external world. I think it's quite easy to see why this is a better way to live than just being pushed and pulled around by chance. This nicely brings us to Viktor Frankl, an Austrian-born Jewish psychiatrist who lived before, during, and after World War II, a practicing psychiatrist, author, and survivor of the Nazi concentration camps which took the lives of his wife and almost all of his immediate family bar his sister. In his book Man's Search for Meaning, which I recommend everyone to read, Frankl wrote, "Between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies our growth and our freedom." It is exactly this space between stimulus and response which we will need to decide our behavior, rediscover who we are, and generally live a happier and more deliberate life. This is the exact same space needed to break free from a life of being the puppet of circumstance, explained by Spinoza. And all that we need is a little self-awareness in real time to pause before we respond to our experiences and make a deliberate choice on how to act. This, as Frankl says, is where we find our freedom. Let's look at some real examples. We can use this space in a number of different ways. Let's take a person who's feeling disconnected from who they are. They lack meaning and purpose, despite wanting to feel those things. A common cause of this is being stuck in stimulus and response. And that stimulus and response cycle means that there's no space for the person to reflect. If we're able to find this space, we can listen to our inner voice that knows our values, knows our beliefs, our likes and dislikes. Perhaps we've conformed too far to societal expectations, or we've become too focused on making money, something that's useful to us, but outside of its use, we don't really value. And in doing so, we've neglected the things that we really value, like family, learning, our hobbies, our interests, traveling, our friends. We could have even conformed to what our parents wanted from us, to be a doctor, a lawyer, or taking over the family business, when all we really wanted to do is code, design video games, set up a bakery, or become an artist. If we can make the time to find this space in life to reflect on who we are, we can learn to listen and reconnect with who we are. If we don't learn to find this space, it's likely that the cycle of stimulus and response, the noise of life, and the momentum of the path we're already on will crowd our ability to find that reconnection, and we will likely remain lost. We could take another person that's feeling anxious about all the injustice in the world, climate change, ongoing wars, the success of a different political party than the one we like, or the cost of living. Frustration of all of these things is quite common these days, and these things can build up to have a corrosive impact on our well-being if left unchecked and unexamined, which they often are. However, if we're able to find a little space between the stimulus of the world and our default response to it, we can use these gaps to reflect on the things that are making us anxious and examine them. We can spend this time to think about things like what we're feeling and what exactly is the cause of those feelings. We can examine what we believe about the world. We can challenge those beliefs and ask ourselves whether or not those beliefs are realistic or whether they're based on assumption or false information. This question in particular, if we're feeling frustrated about the world, is needed more than ever these days. Not only should we question information we don't agree with, we should also make a special effort to question information that seemingly aligns with what we already believe, because of the dangerous tendency for people to simply accept things that seem close to things that they already agree with. This simple act of examination and finding space can provide an opening for us to work through what's troubling us and lessen its impact. For example, a well-used Stoic practice is to understand that there's very little we can control about the external world, if anything. However, we can control how we respond to it, how we behave, and what we believe. To the Stoics, learning to accept the things that we can't control and taking responsibility for the things that we can, namely our responses to things, our thoughts and beliefs, removes the impact of the external world on our own well-being, while at the same time empowering us to do what we can with what we have. Both of these things can go a long way towards becoming more resilient to external events. This idea of acceptance is often misunderstood, so I think it's important to note here that accepting things outside of our control is not the same as accepting that they are moral or accepting that they are right and doing nothing. It's simply the acceptance that there are things that have happened or will happen regardless of what we personally do. Trying to control the uncontrollable or placing too much of our well-being on the things that we can do nothing about will result in our well-being becoming tied to circumstance. This is not a resilient way to live and is the cause of suffering that can be partly or wholly avoided. Without finding this space that Frankl speaks of, we can't process, we can't reflect, and we can't think about the things that are bothering us. They just build up and fester like weeds in a garden, and they add to the chains that bind us. Finding this space allows us to become the gardener for a while and keep those weeds at bay. If you've had some success with some of these things already, please share your experiences in the comments below. And you can mention what's worked for you, how it's impacted your life, and other ways we can find space in the world around us. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, share it with others, and if you want to, subscribe. All of these things help YouTube know that the information is helpful, and it gets it in front of more people. Thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you in the next one.